greetings in the love and light of the one infinite creator. I'm Andrii Zvorygin, and joined here today by Mathis Wackernagel, Ivor Loffing, Steve, ABC, and Mathis has a presentation for us, and maybe more people will join us later. Mathis, would you like to start by introducing yourself?
Of course. Yeah, no, lovely. It's wonderful to be with you. Thank you so much, Andrii, for organizing, and Ivor and Steve. I'm Mathis Wackernagel, originally from Switzerland, and live now in California for the last 25 years or so. My passion has always been kind of the idea of like, how can we live on this one planet in peace? We started Global Footprint Network in 2003. There's an echo.
There's an echo. Hold on. I'm trying to figure out what is it.
I think
Charlie. Hold on.
Yeah.
Okay, I muted Charlie. Okay, good. Go ahead.
Yeah. So back in the early 90s, with my PhD advisor Bill Rees, we started to develop the ecological footprint out of this frenzy on the sustainable development debate that was becoming strong globally, and led to kind of the Rio conference, etc. But there was no metric, so that's how we thought it'd be useful to develop a metric that actually compares human demand against what Earth can renew, and then that developed into the Global Footprint Network, which we started in 2003, and we have been doing ever since. And so that's what has occupied me for the last 30 years.
Awesome.
And entertained me.
and do tell us about the recent Nobel Prize that you got.
Oh, that's a sweet little story. Yeah. So in November, from the Nobel family, I got this prize for sustainability implementation. So the Nobel family recognized that many of the Nobel Prizes are not super relevant for the big challenges we face overall. So the family, through their Nobel Trust, started a new award called the Nobel Sustainability Award. And I was in the second year, was chosen for one of the three who got this wonderful prize, which was awesome. And even more awesome was they actually had the event. They always have the event somewhere in the world, and just happened to be so close that I could get there by bicycle.
Wow, wonderful.
That was cool.
Yeah. All right. So did you want to start your
get it too? Did Bill Rees get it too?
Not this one, because it was about implementation.
Oh.
So anyhow, but maybe hopefully next year.
All right. Okay. So you had a presentation for us, Matt?
Yeah. Thank you so much. So this is a great opportunity. I hope we can keep it conversational. Oops, everything is.
Oh, okay. You just tell me when you're ready, and I'll maximize your presentation screen.
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay, you're ready. Okay, good. There you go.
Good. So what I would like to give is just a bit of a background of how we're thinking about kind of the sustainability conundrum that we live in, and also in the context of your conversations around peak oil, etc., how that matches, what may be differences, etc. So our focus has been mostly on like ecological overshoot, meaning to what extent the human metabolism has become larger than what Earth can regenerate. So what I would like to focus on is starting from a kind of first principle to understand like what's actually the problem you're trying to address. That may be slightly different from the peak oil conversation. I think the bigger theme is, as I said, overshoot. How can we live peacefully and well on this planet without destroying it? So to what extent can we manage the reality that the planet only has a certain size and we seem to be too voracious? That seems to be quite an obvious problem. And then there are sub-problems to it. One of the key ones is, why are we not responding to it when it's so life-threatening overall? That's kind of a surprising omission of humanity. Yeah. So ultimately, I think what we also recognize that overshoot will end That's not the question. The question is only how. Do we do
Mhm.
it by design or by disaster? And so, on some level, I think in the earlier times of the peak oil conversation, there was this hope that actually, on some level, that the end of the fossil fuel age, which is a big driver of overshoot, will impose just a moving out of fossil fuels. And I think what we realize is that this is no longer the case, that the fossil fuels that we've already found, there's different estimates. It's hard to estimate what it actually would mean, but just if we burn everything that we've already found, the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere would go beyond 1200 ppm, probably much beyond, because once you're at that level, then also you start to release methane from permafrost, etc. So it becomes
The
even stronger,
feedback
etc.
loops.
Feedback loop are tremendous. So
Mhm.
peak oil in itself is no longer kind of a savior of the day in some ways. So the way
Oh,
we
I
are,
just
yeah,
have a question.
yeah.
What is for this one? What was the ultimate recoverable reserves that you were working with? Are you going by, the what was your source for
The
that
sources,
we
like
could produce this much?
one paper that kind of discusses it is the one that I just listed here on the slide.
Oh, okay. Oh,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
see. Okay, I
yeah,
see it.
yeah,
Okay, thank you.
yeah,
Thank
yeah,
you.
yeah. But the different estimates that I've seen, like the big range is up to 2000 ppm, etc.
Mhm.
Yeah. So and yeah. Anyhow, so
Yeah. Well, yeah, we're just hoping that it's in the lower range. I think 2,200 is ultimately recoverable. What we're
okay,
working with.
yeah.
Yeah.
I
Go
think
ahead.
this one was based on a higher estimate.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
think. Anyhow, yeah. Anyhow, so but even at that level, it's kind of levels that kind of are probably unhealthy from a climate change perspective. Now,
Mhm.
what perhaps to start with is also kind of saying we're dealing with information.
Mhm.
What makes information effective? I think I wish I had listened to Upton Sinclair earlier, even though he had said that already in the 1920s, that we think information changes the world. But actually, if information, like as he said, it's very hard to understand if your salary depends on not understanding. So if
Yeah.
information doesn't empower people, they use their beautiful brain to fight it, not to embrace it. And then adding more information to the equation is just adding fuel to the fire. So
Right.
so
Mhm.
so so this is kind of the place from where I come from. To be effective, information needs to have three parts. Obviously, one is it
Mhm.
needs to be empowering. So people think, oh, I'm better off with it rather than
Mhm.
having it. It's not a burden. That's the opposite. Obviously, it needs also to be factual, because eventually it's going to be found out, and then that kind of falls apart. So kind of the empirical base important, but then also it has to be relevant, because otherwise it's irrelevant. So these for me are kind of the three key pieces that make information potentially transformational. And that's kind of transformation can be driven by different things. I think most people in this place choose information as their preferred weapon, so to say.
Mhm.
So what's the context? That's how we started also our footprint thinking. I think the recognition that humanity's activities, or humanity as a whole, has become very, very large compared to the planet. How large? So some people
Mhm.
called it, like Herman Daly, empty world before. Now we're in a full world, and the full world just changes the dynamics of how things operate, whether we like it or not. So it's not about kind of do we want to accept that or not, but it's kind of how is it kind of shifting things. Sometimes we call it becomes a global auction, because once you overuse something, with more money you cannot buy more things if the more things don't exist. It's like if you in an auction for art, if there's so many Picasso paintings that you can buy, there's only so many Picasso paintings, and then the the economic dynamics to get access to these resources likens more an auction.
Mhm.
Also, when we look at what do we mean by size of of humanity compared to the world, what's the limiting factor? And I will spend a little bit of time on that. Because in the peak oil community, obviously you talk about the fossil fuel, which is a big driver overall. But it would
Mhm.
take one step back and say the real limiting factor for materially limiting factor for ecology is really what Earth can regenerate.
Mhm.
So it's the ecosystem's ability to reproduce biomass, so to say, which then becomes the
Yeah.
food for all animals.
So I had a question
Yes,
regarding to your
please.
statement there, because my understanding is that already the what do you call it? The climate change is happening faster than the trees can migrate themselves farther north, and so I think that we just have to acknowledge that part of the ecosystem regenerating itself includes the humans that are willing to plant, the suitable trees for the environment as it changes, and to
People,
help create those ecologies.
people have an enormous influence on regeneration, obviously. They have an
Mhm.
influence on how much we take and how much is being regenerated, no question. And so what we offer with the metrics, as I will show, is a description of what it is. It's not a speculation about the future. It's like with
Mhm.
financial accounting, where you look every year, how much do you use? How much do you have? You can do the same thing for nature. So
Mhm.
that's why we think regeneration is really at the core, and oops, and it and that's the outcome. Other people look at pieces of it, or they say there need to be certain conditions, like for example, planetary boundaries. They say, okay, there's certain aspects that need to be healthy in order to have a healthy biosphere, so the climate, biodiversity, nutrients, etc., ozone layer. These we would call in economic language the production factors, that are there, that need to be there in order to make regeneration happen. And then the outcome is regeneration overall. And
Mhm.
why is regeneration the essence or the mother of all resources, or perhaps we say the overarching resource? Because obviously it limits what we could call biological resources, which is food and fiber and all these things that we harvest, like agroecology, agriculture, everything we harvest from biological means. That's the biological resources. It also limits, in my view, the use of fossil fuels, because there are too many on the ground, and it's limited. Fossil fuel use is meaningfully limited by how much the biosphere can absorb, and that again is in competition with how much we harvest biological resources, because we could choose to absorb more CO2, but then there are less carrots available, etc. So that's kind of a second demand. And also even mining, I would argue, is also limited by regeneration, because there's a lot of stuff underground. But the question is,
Mhm.
how much are we willing to give up of the regeneration to access these minerals? Because both like the mining activity itself is resource intensive and space intensive, and then the
Mhm.
concentration of the minerals, etc., takes resources. And so in some ways we could say, overall, as a first approximation, regeneration becomes the mother of all resources. So that's why we map the world from that perspective and
Uh-huh.
say how much regeneration is embodied in
Yes.
everything we do. That's essentially the principle. So
Mhm.
the lens of the analysis is we're in competition for regeneration. There's then this other thing, and I'm glad Shale is here as well, because the question is not just how much is available, but also the quality of the availability. So that's something we can discuss perhaps later. So it's not just are we in quantity measures fitting within the budget, but also how valuable are these various resources, and that could be measured, for example, with energy return on investment, because that gives us an idea on like how much effort do we need to make in order to get something back. If it's too much effort to get something back, then it becomes less useful for people.
Mhm.
So the way we do just a basic balance sheet, and there's just a basic quantitative necessities. I would say it's a necessary, not sufficient condition, is to say on the one hand, we would need to know how much capacity, how much regenerative capacity, we call it biocapacity, do we occupy for our demand. And so we use fish products. We use like some of the productive areas paved over for cities. Actually, the most productive areas are paved over for cities, because that's where agriculture is easiest. Uh, we use food, we use fiber, etc. So we can add that all up. All the things that are in competition with each other, that are excluding each other, you can add up, and you say that's the area necessary to provide for your demand. And then you can say, you can compare that with how much is available. We call that biocapacity. Globally, if you just look at the maps around the world and the land use statistics, you can calculate the surface of the planet. That's pretty easy if you know a bit of
Mhm.
geometry. But then also not everything is highly productive. So about a quarter of the surface of the planet contains most of the productivity or harvestable productivity. The rest is ice fields, deep oceans, mountains, etc., where
All
there's
right. Mm-hmm.
not that much productivity. So then you divide that. That's kind of statistics for last year. Divide that productive area by um, number of people on the planet
Yeah.
today. You get about 1.5 hectares of ecologically productive space. We
Mm-hmm.
then say an average hectare, or what the average produces per hectare, we call a global hectare as a unit. Like when you do financial accounting, you want to do a currency that is kind of consistent across countries. So use as a relative kind of comparison the global hectare as the standard. And they change also year after year because, as you said before, regeneration can shift from year to year. So that's kind of what's available.
I had
Yeah,
a question
please.
regarding
Yeah.
global hectares.
Mhm.
And so, because, like, say for instance, I always thought of like a global hectare as like 6 months growing season with enough rainfall, like 500 millimeters or something.
Mhm.
And so, like, if you're in an area that say has like say only 3 months of winter,
Mhm.
then 2 actual hectares would be equal to a global hectare. Is that how it goes, or are you using it a
I mean,
different way?
it's pretty close, yeah. So basically, we just look at what in the end is squeezed out of the toothpaste tube, so what's coming out,
Mhm.
and so in some places it's drier, but you have longer seasons, or like this. There's so many combinations, and in the end, so we just compare in terms of biomass production, what does it do on a yearly basis. We use yearly basis as kind of the unit because many cycles typically are kind of on a yearly term, so kind of looking at the yearly average seems to be a helpful unit of calculation. Yeah. So then, so this is what's available, and you can compare it. This is kind of the global comparison. How much do we use? So we use about 21.3 global hectares, or 2.6 per person, which is larger, as you can see, than what we have available. And you may ask yourself, how is it possible to use more area than what we have? Is that possible? And we say yes, because it's like if you think of a forest, for example, and you cut twice as many trees, then trees regrow. It's like using twice the forest size at the regenerative rate. Does that make sense? So it is possible
Right.
to use more.
So,
Yeah, please.
so like, and this is globally on average.
This is the global average.
Global average. And so, yeah, so my understanding, what you're saying is that it's like we're using more than we can regenerate, and that's why it's higher than what.
That's correct. Yeah, and so we can do that because you can deplete stocks.
Right. Look,
Yeah.
especially like carbon.
So
like
one
fossil
stock. I mean,
fuels.
so one stock is. I mean, so since we look at it from the regeneration perspective, so the stock there is kind of one stock is kind of the sink function. So we accumulate CO2 in the atmosphere, which is a debt, so to say, an ecological debt that we leave for the planet. And then also there's some overfishing going on. In some places we overharvest forests. Yeah. Now our estimates, these are estimates based on UN statistics in order not to be data picking. The UN statistics are limited. Obviously, we use about 15,000 data points per country and year. When I say we now, it's actually being calculated. The national calculations are now being done by York University in Toronto. 15,000 data points. And so it's conservative in the sense of underestimating overshoot for two reasons. On the footprint side, not every consumption is fully documented, and there's some aspects that are hard to integrate. For example, methane emissions are not included in the accounts because it's hard to kind of say where do they come from, whom are they attributed to overall, and that's a big part of the climate greenhouse gases. So they're, for example, not included, but then there are also other aspects of consumption that are not fully documented. On the regeneration side, the UN statistics are very production oriented, like FAO, and they are underreport damage, like damage, for example, of groundwater depletion or soil depletion, etc. So things are actually damaging the production that reduce productivity, like are not fully accounted for. So biocapacity is probably exaggerated. footprint is probably underestimated, so overshoot may be even larger.
Mhm.
Now, when you look at these two, the ratio is 1.7 between demand and regeneration, and so you can translate that also into a date. You could say, if you look at the whole year, from
Mhm.
January 1st, by when would you have used up the entire budget? And so for 2024, we calculated, and it's kind of not exactly precise, but so the date we found is kind of for 2024 is August
Mhm.
1st. So
Mhm.
between January 1st and August 1st, humanity used as much as Earth can renew in the
And
entire year.
I have a question. Is the date getting closer to January 1st or farther
Yeah, so
away?
you can go to overshootday.org to see. So in the last 10 years, it has stayed pretty stable. But stable doesn't actually stable, pretty constant, I would say. It's not necessarily stable. So we're just adding debt at a very high rate because the deficit spending continues. Yeah.
Mhm.
But it's kind of in a similar vein. So slightly coming earlier, not at speed as we saw before. But now we say, like, how many Earth would be useful to use for people? So ecology suggests probably using more than half the capacity of the planet would be compromising biodiversity. So that comes from island studies to see like how much actually should be left for wild species.
Oh,
Then
okay.
so ideally, I could say, I think for
Mhm.
a stable, robust world, it would be better to use 1/3 of what we use currently.
Mhm. Wow, yeah, that would be a very a very big change.
Would be a big change, but and at the same time, and so yeah, it may.
Mhm.
I'm just saying what's ecologically stable,
Mhm.
and so the
Steve,
difference.
oh,
Yeah,
go ahead.
yeah.
You finish what you're saying, and then Steve has a
Okay.
question. Okay.
Steve.
Okay, Steve, go ahead.
Oh, Mathis, excellent. This is an excellent. I appreciate you sharing this, and I just wanted to add. This wasn't a question, but if you go to China, and Mathis, you probably know this. There's just you can go to cities. There's just no birds. It's amazing how little wildlife there is in China for various reasons. But this is the word that I've been hearing from people that go to China, and so it is important to have the wildlife for even insects. There's really no insects, and so it is important what you're talking about. I just wanted to add that.
Hmm.
You probably know the statistic. I think Václav Smil was the first one to kind of just did a rough calculation. I don't know how it has changed over time, but roughly the conclusion is that there was another paper by I can't remember their name. I could look it up. They looked at the whole kind of biomass on the planet, like how it's distributed, and if you just look at mammalian, like land-based mammalian biomass, about 1/4 is just humans, and
Hmm.
3 times more is our domesticated animals, uh, some pets, but mostly the ones we eat.
Hmm.
And then, all right, and then there's a remaining like 3 to 5%, which is wild mammalian. So that includes
3%.
the mice and the
Hmm.
elephants. Yeah,
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, it's very small.
yeah, very
Mhm.
small.
And the graphics you had about the different the food, crops, and
Hmm.
seafood, and
Hmm.
uh, as you know, 50% of seafood is now farm raised.
Yeah.
So, and so that's very extensive and polluting at the same time.
Yes. Hmm.
Yep.
Yeah. So we have been able to kind of, I mean, squeeze still a lot of stuff, and a big reason why we are able to squeeze so much out of this toothpaste tube is fossil fuels, obviously. So
Hmm.
currently, if you look at what proportion of our demand is fossil fuel based, and globally it's about 60%. And that also matches other observations. Like, for example, I think in the early 60s, all the fibers being used, I think 97% were of biological origin. And I think now the, the portion of biological origin of fibers is only 30%. The rest is synthetic. Anyhow, so there's more you can find. Actually, we can go into
Yep.
this data.footprintnetwork.org is particularly interesting because you can look at a map by country and look at the trends. UN data goes back consistently till 1961, so you can also look at the time series of how things have developed over time. Okay, now, oops, no, I don't want to go here. I want to go here. Cancel. So I
would just like to say that I taught in China back in 1984 at Nanjing Agricultural University. And I was at Cornell at that time, and they had some mutual agreement. And I was amazed. I want to agree with a recent comment that I saw essentially nothing wild. And that was at the time when diversity and stability was really starting to permeate the ecological literature and mindset and so forth. And I found no biodiversity except amongst the vegetables. And so and these rice paddies that were dominant had been farmed for 2,000 years. So with close to as low biodiversity as one can imagine, they were quite stable. And, and I'm an ecologist, and I'm thinking, I wonder if that's another thing that ecologists are supposed to believe that are not necessarily true. Now, don't get me wrong. I think that the globe needs biodiversity, but I was impressed with the situation in China in 1984.
Yeah. This is absolutely, I think, what you say, that this metaphor often used to say, oh, how many rivets can you take out of the plane, until it's not stable anymore. And to some level, like with peak oil, unfortunately, with biodiversity, you can take a lot of rivets out. So there's no automatic feedback to maintain biodiversity.
I wanted to share that even now in China, because their insect population is so low, many of them have to pollinate their trees by hand. Otherwise, they wouldn't get apples or fruit. And then I just can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. And then I also wanted to share this graphic that we often share that's related to your resilience. That this is the regular, the exploitation, conservation, and then oftentimes the civilization collapses and go into a release phase. But it's possible to go from conservation to reorganization, where you're planting the trees, and then you can kind of continue the cycle without having to create a massive desert, like happened to the Middle East and things like this.
So perhaps just important to emphasize here, just kind of to put that in contrast. So what here we offer is to be spectacularly kind of boring and just accounting. We offer just basic accounting. We're not doing kind of any dynamic speculation. We just document how much we use, how much we have, so to take all speculation out, because that was an early criticism that because everybody's speculating about the future, but we don't know about the future, so you must be totally wrong. Said, no, we're not just bookkeepers.
Yeah.
Bean counters. Anyhow, we are bean counters. So what I would like to do now for the next part is show how it could be applied to actually make some transformation more likely. Should I share the screen again, or is that good?
Oh yeah, I'm sharing it now with everybody.
Good. That's good. Yeah. So I think the key thing that we do, rather than to use the word sustainability, which is so broadly used and people that may not understand what it means, or there's not agreement among understanding, there's probably not one understanding, we reframe it just as saying, given that the future is quite predictable, that in any scenario, in any possible scenario, there will be more climate change and more resource constraints. And then the question is only like, what's the balance between the two, because we can be wise and quickly move out of fossil fuel use, or not so wise, and then we have more climate change, and eventually we also will have to move out of fossil fuels. But there will be more climate change and resource constraints. So given that context, the question becomes, which of our assets, and with assets I mean essentially like the capacity to operate, like the capacity to be housed, to transport, to feed, to be warm, etc., which assets will hold value in that predictable future? And so it kind of flips it around, because I think the biggest tragedy we face in the sustainability conversation is this deep belief by many that incentives are not aligned. And there are many names for that, like the economists may call it free rider problem, so that you get a free ride that's paid by society, or vice versa, that we have to sacrifice ourselves for humanity. So that's kind of the unaligned incentives. Tragedy of the commons is a related concept, or prisoner's dilemma. I mean, there are many names to kind of that question of unaligned incentives. And while I don't deny that there are sometimes unaligned incentives, overall, I would say sustainability is actually much, much more, or kind of the transformation that is much more aligned with incentives than we think. And the argument is the following, is to say the future has never been more predictable, as I said. Because we know that people want to eat and sleep. We also know that people will live in a world with more climate change and resource constraints. What we also know is the following, because overshoot is a cumulative effect, the future comes quicker than we may expect. This is not about how much overshoot we had last year. It's the accumulation of all the overshoot in the past that leads to an ecological debt. So the future is coming faster than we expect, and probably faster than our physical infrastructure, because it's so inert, like it has a huge inertia, may be able to adapt. So we're already late in the game. So it's not about the future, it's about current asset allocation or current budget allocation, that we're not allocating the resources adequately. So that's kind of the the challenge that we face. So given that, then we say, okay, what actually will do well in that predictable future? And I would say the most valuable things will be those that if you have more of them, overshoot goes down. Why is that? Because these are things that will be needed more. They will be able to operate. They will be not in competition for kind of limited resources. So they have much more opportunity to be useful. And what is useful typically, not always, but typically, is also more valuable, even in dollars and cents in some ways. So that's kind of the argument. So saying again, so the predictability of the of the future, which assets hold value. As I said, assets that drive down overshoot as they expand will gain value. They will not run into resource constraints. Their costs will be lower. They'll be needed more. Now, that may look like a pipe dream. How is that possible? How can you have more of something and demand goes down? And so I just used a very simple example. If you have a car company, for example, producing cars takes resources. So that's the resource consumption. Then you sell them, and using the cars uses even more resources. So the more you expand your car companies and you sell things that take even more resources, and so these things will be increasingly facing more challenges because it will be more difficult to operate them. You can contrast that with, let's say, a company that produces windmills, takes resources to produce the windmills, but if they're produced well and the energy return on investment of the windmill is positive, they can displace coal power overall. They will actually, as there are more of them, reduce overall demand. If depends on the context, not in every context. So they have the potential to reduce overshoot for humanity. So the more there are of them, at least at the margin, the overshoot goes down. So they will be doing better overall in that future we can predict. So this is just kind of the example, yeah.
So I know Dusty Green had a question. I don't know. And then also Simon has joined us.
Yeah.
I want to say hi, Simon. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead. Dusty Green.
Hi, everybody. Nice to see you guys. My question, I guess, would be is in this scenario that you've discussed, how much of the overshoot is due to waste, like waste of food or, transporting resources, mismanagement of basic resources?
I mean, some of the waste is inevitable, so we don't judge. We just see this is what's happening. This is how much is disappearing in a country overall. So I now quote like other people who have studied food waste, and food waste is also something complicated because what do you include in food waste? Is it things that you could have actually eaten that you throw away, or is it the potato peel that you kind of, so in some ways, at what stage of food waste, or is it kind of what the mice eat on the field overall? But there are these kind of estimates that food waste may be in the order of 20% of the food production overall. Food overall, just roughly uses about half the planet's biocapacity if you include like producing it, including the energy to kind of store it and produce it and send it around, etc. So half the planet's biocapacity is just food. So how much of the food waste could be reduced? Some can be, but probably not everything.
And then I had a question, a related one, in terms of Jevons paradox. Like,
Yes,
if we
wonderful.
become more efficient, won't that just make people want to use things more?
So let me take this more from a scientific perspective. The rebound effect, as it's also called, the Jevons principle, the idea that things that are more useful or things that are more efficient will become more useful and therefore use more, and therefore they kind of stimulate economic activity. And if you look at kind of traditional economic theory, growth theory, like what makes economies grow, efficiency is always counted as one of the big drivers. So things get more efficient, then we have GDP growth. So obviously, it's a very significant dynamic that. So Jevons was one of the first who mentioned it, and so it's called the rebound effect. Now, the rebound effect scientifically is very difficult to measure overall, because normally when you look at things, you analyze something, and then you say, okay, what are the boundaries of the analysis? There's that much, and then you say, okay, we should include more. And so the more you include, asymptotically, you still come to a slightly different result, but asymptotically it approaches something. With the rebound effect, it's exactly the opposite. The bigger you make the circles exponentially, the impact grows. So if you just say, okay, I now have a more energy efficient car, I don't drive more kilometers, then you don't see it. But say, oh, but actually, what do you do with the money that you don't spend now? So and then, oh, what about the car company that actually now can sell more cars? Or what about, because with the cars are cheaper now, people can get jobs further away where they can earn more money? What about so the more you look, then it becomes exponentially bigger. So it's a very difficult phenomenon to analyze scientifically, even though it's actually real in the end. So it's not as directly measurable, but it's a big effect. So I think we would look at that from an analytical perspective, from the perspective of saying, what does something displace? So with the windmill, as an example, is the windmill that you put, is it just adding electricity consumption, or is it displacing? Are you at the same time closing down coal plants? So if not, then it's not like gaining. So overall, so that's why for us the interesting analysis first is to start from the macro perspective, because then you capture everything, like what's happening, and then you can kind of divide it down. But it gets harder and harder to look at the smaller the entity, what exactly is its contribution, it becomes less precise, I would say.
And I don't know if Simon wants to comment on this, but I've heard a common kind of criticism of the renewables is that they are just adding rather than displacing our energy usage. Simon, I know you've done a lot of research on that. I don't know if you wanted to.
Yeah, sure.
Elaborate.
So I'm taking the approach of he who turns up late waits last. Mathis, nice to meet you, mate. So yes, renewable technology are systems that are very, very resource intensive, and their industrial footprint from an exergy point of view is huge, and they're not as effective, which means they need a lot of supporting infrastructure that doesn't exist at the moment. So far, all the renewables that we've installed have not displaced any fossil fuel at all. Oil, gas, and coal have increased more in terms of energy consumption and production than renewables installed. So we haven't actually phased out any fossil fuels yet at all, in spite of all the work being done. So I'm actually sort of looking at work. I do have some new stuff to show what's actually sort of happening. We can do that whenever, Andrew, later in the sequence. But but there is an interface with what you presented, Mathis, where what I'm now starting to understand is the planetary carrying capacity for the human species is one line of inquiry. The resource consumption of the carbon pulse is another, and they're not the same thing.
Correct.
Whereas most work done thus far has been very hard to untangle them. And so I'm actually starting to do exactly that, untangle them.
Yes. There's a very unfortunate movie, I think, that was sponsored by Michael Moore. I call it Planet of the Humans, I think. Did you see that? Some of you saw that. That is quite critical about the renewables. And I mean, there's good reasons to be renewable, to be critical. I'm not saying they're kind of the panacea, but I think the lesson, I mean, their lesson is more, it's just capitalism trying to make more money, etc. I think the lesson is just to show like how hard it is to get out of the fossil fuels, but not getting off them is deadly. So it's a much harder problem that people imagine. I think that's also, I mean, my reading also of the US situation currently, this with the technology people being so prominently now influential in the policy field, they have kind of this perception that technology can provide 10x solutions in no time at all. While when you actually look at, I mean, I live close to San Francisco. If you look at the housing stock of San Francisco and compare it with 30 or even 50 years ago, you barely see a difference. I mean, there's some more high rises, but in terms of the energy efficiency of houses, they're like the infrastructure, just that the drain on resources from the existing infrastructure is so baked in and not changeable within 5 years or 2 years. Certainly not by 10x, so I think we underappreciate the physical inertia of our system and how and so we used to say like slow things first. We have to focus on slow things first because it takes so long to get them on the right track. And for politicians who say no, slow things last because they won't happen on our watch. So we don't prepare for the hard things early enough. And that's actually just one statement I really appreciated by Bill Gates. I was actually taken by him, even though I think he doesn't focus enough on the biological side of things. But he was asked, because he said we have to get out of fossil fuel, like he said, 0 carbon emissions. So he was asked, shouldn't we do the kind of the low-hanging fruit first? And he said no. Because 0 means everything. We have to learn how to decarbonize everything. So we have to focus on the hard things too, which I think was kind of an honest view. So rather than saying it's too hard, therefore let's not do it and let's keep on the old track.
Charlie has a question.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Charlie.
Hi, Mathis. I visited Mathis about a month ago. And
lovely.
we go way back. But anyway, I said to Mathis, do you have any discernible effects in the world from all the work that you've done? And so he gave me his answer, and then I said, well, here we are, and we've generated, and I'm a little bit embarrassed to try to say that I'm quite in Mathis league in this situation, but we've developed 2 of the most iconic concepts in the, I don't know what you call it, sustainable or whatever world, EROI and especially ecological footprint, and neither one of us has any sense that we have moved the Queen Mary an inch. And Mathis, you still agree with that, Mathis? I assume you do.
I'm still trying. I mean, I think so. I think one of the big things. That's why I think like what I realize is that's why I put Upton Sinclair's quote up first. That I thought what I offered was of use to people, but what I realized is that they didn't see it as empowering. So that's kind of why I'm so much.
I'm sorry, what
focusing
you
on
realized is what?
it was people didn't receive it as empowering. I thought I was giving them useful information that helps them to have better, safer lives.
Yeah.
And I realized that they didn't see it that way. They rather shun me at the party and say, "Oh my God, I didn't do my composting. I'm so embarrassed to look into Mathis's eyes, even though I couldn't care less." But I mean, so it's kind of the moral burden is so dominant in the narrative that people have a hard time kind of thinking straight about the issue.
Well, I've recently been working with a philosopher, Tim McWhirter, and he contacted me a number of years ago because of his he was did his PhD on Nietzsche and the will to power, and he thought that connected very well with Howard Odum, my advisor's concept of maximum power principle. And if anybody wants that paper, just write me chall@esf.edu. And he's now published a book on that from Springer, and just look up McWhirter. So I think there's something to that, unfortunately. And Howard Odum thought the whole thing would be over when we, ran out of oil, but that's taking a little longer than we
too
thought.
long.
And so maybe not a whole lot longer. I can only hope that it'll happen during the next 4 years.
So I just got some point of process here is that if it, I don't know, Mathis, how much more of the presentation, if we could do do you think you could be able,
Yeah.
like within 8 minutes, just because we also got
Do-
Simon
yes,
had some
yeah,
things to show,
yeah,
and then also I
absolutely.
got questions from the
I'm
YouTube
two at the end.
people.
Mhm.
Okay, awesome. Mhm.
So just to close it up, so this was kind of the micro statement was to say actually those assets, and that's true for cities, companies, but even individually, that as they expand, reduce global overshoot, I believe are much more likely to maintain value in the future that is predictable. That's kind of one thing. But then also at the macro level, I think there may be a shift on its way that now kind of this overshoot is a tremendous market failure. So basically you could say the market failure is that the market is not able to regulate how much we use compared to how much is available. If there are bakeries, for example, if there's too few bakeries, the bread gets too expensive, more people start to break bread, and then the bread price goes down again. With the resources, that equilibrium doesn't seem to be working, so it's a huge market failure. So you could ask yourself, how much higher would the prices for the products of biocapacity need to be in order to get demand down to a level that is maintainable? And that difference is a huge, because it's so inelastic. Our demand on resources is so inelastic that price would be exorbitantly much higher. And to a large extent, that price difference is what the countries in green here leave on the table. These are countries that have more biocapacity than what they use themselves. So there's an economic kind of disequilibrium and an opportunity for kind of shifting the market dynamics in the future as these countries realize their market advantage.
Oh, Mathis, could you move that little window at the bottom, because we can't see the biocapacity creditors? Yeah, the meet.librit. You see, it says is sharing your screen. Do you see that at the bottom?
Yeah.
So yeah, just you click on. Yeah, there you go.
Oh, okay.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, I didn't.
Or you
I
could even
didn't see
move it
that.
to your other monitor.
Oh, yeah, that's good. Okay, good.
Okay,
Cool.
yeah. Okay.
I-
All right. Now we can see. Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. Thank
Sorry.
you.
So
It's all good.
if you go to the website data.footprintnetwork.org, you can actually see it interactively and play with the countries.
Oh, nice.
But so that's kind of just the macro story, is to say who actually is going to gain or is more likely to be on the winning side, and right now they're not playing to that yet, but that's kind of just the other perspective. So in essence, to summarize everything, and then I'm closing it down. Overshoot is not our burden. It's not our personal issue. It's just a context in which we live, which shifts many dynamics, including economic dynamics. The second thing is that I think also there's no downside for better understanding the future. I think I don't need to tell that in this community, but that's kind of many people. Oh my God, I don't want to think about the future. It's so terrible. Then no, there's no downside. Better understanding can prepare yourself.
Always better.
And I think from the positive news, something that is underexploited, because people just so deeply believe that incentives are misaligned, that we have to give ourselves up for this abstract humanity. No, actually, there's so many key activities where incentives are aligned. If you are not ready for the predictable future, you are not ready. And the less others prepare themselves for that future, the higher is the risk for you, and you not being ready is even more dangerous to you. So incentives are quite strongly aligned to move towards that transformation. That's kind of the essence of what I wanted to impart. And if you want to contact me or find more, this is my website, and looking forward to hearing from you.
Great. Thanks. All right.
Now stop sharing, I guess, no?
Okay. Yeah. You can stop sharing. Yeah. And I wanted to. Are there questions from the panel or comments regarding Mathis's presentation? Ivor, go ahead.
I was wondering. There were only a couple of European countries that were not, in Overshoot, or not in the, in the red area there. That was Scandinavian countries, and it looks like even Canada is in the pink, right?
Oh, Canada's
green.
Green, yeah.
Canada's green. So these countries that are still in the green, are they going to be the ones that sort of somehow are the kind of rich countries in the future, are the ones that are able to maintain a lifestyle? Because we have a certain person that's pushing to
annex.
Yeah, to annex, like some of those places. And I was wondering if that's what they're actually after. Are they some kind of is there some kind of crazy
a resource grab?
Resource grab, yeah.
I mean, I do believe that biocapacity is a much more essential part of wealth than people recognize. And I think there's one confusion that you hear a lot in just the conversation is people confusing income and wealth. So they talk about rich countries and poor countries, whatever, but they mean actually high income and low income. I believe that resource security, having access to sufficient resources, is a key advantage in the long run, or in the medium run, even the short run, that is not appreciated yet. So my goal really would be for countries, that's what I look for. Countries that don't have resource security centrally mentioned and discussed in their economic development strategy, I think are suicidal.
Yes.
And I see very few who kind of seriously embrace this idea. There are some countries, one country I know of that doesn't have enough resources, but thinks about resources very proactively, which is China. Others are pretty oblivious.
All right. I'll also have questions from Charlie and then Simon. Go ahead, Charlie.
Mathis, certainly I agree with you in general and so forth, but just let's make an analogy. Let's say that you're from a family that your grandfather made a whole lot of money doing something or another. So you start off with a lot in the bank,
Mhm.
and you're a profligate son or daughter, and you live your whole life far beyond your means. But it doesn't matter because you got such a buffer of to draw down your accounts. So I mean that's a little bit like the situation in the United States now, I guess, that we have a lot of stuff in the account in the bank, soils, fish, whatever, that we can draw down. So it seems to me that we don't notice, most people don't notice that for a variety of reasons that probably are represented by debt. Um, and so there's something about the relation between the footprint and biocapacity and the storage of biocapacity that I think is important. That I don't think. I mean, I know you've thought about this far more than I have, but well, tell me what you think about. Is that a useful idea or not, or whatever?
Absolutely. I think, I mean, it's the whole question of stocks and flows and etc. And uh, people may not appreciate significantly, and it's a mindset question. I mean, so the many questions in your question, but I think one is like, why would, if you have a lot of resources available, why would you care? I come from Switzerland originally. There's a lot of gold in the Swiss banks, but the Swiss banks would say, oh, we have so much gold in the bank, let's keep the doors open because we have so much. They actually are even more eager to kind of carefully manage the gold in the bank, even though they have so much. So having a lot and doesn't necessarily mean you should squander it. Some people will squander it. It's not a guarantee that having a lot will make you manage it wisely and carefully. I'm just so I think it's about my mindset recognizing that we have to think not about income as much as not so much of the central concern. The central concern is wealth, and with wealth, I mean capacity. That's the physical expression of wealth is capacity. Capacity to do things. Or do you have the capacity to feed yourself, to house yourself, to move about, etc.? Do you have the right capacities as a country, as a city, as a company to be able to operate? It becomes very practical and simple. And as long as we don't recognize like how wealth dependent we are, and that actually resource security is kind of the wealth concept is at the bottom of the wealth pyramid, that kind of the essential block, we make decisions that actually will hurt ourselves. That's why I think, kind of, as I said, countries that don't have resource security at the center of their economic development strategy are suicidal because they don't understand wealth.
Mm-hmm. Good points. Simon, you had a question?
Yeah, hi. My net's very poor, so it keeps dropping out if I'm a little.
Oh, yeah, you dropped out there. Do you want to try
My
turning
question
off your video?
Your expertise is very.
Oh, we can't hear you,
Okay.
Simon. Yeah, okay, try now.
Okay, so how about now? Is that better?
Much better.
Yes.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Much better.
Yep. Okay. So, all right, Mathis, very nice to meet you. Your expertise is very nice to come in contact with. This is a broad brush question. In your opinion, if we reorganize the planet and how we did things, what's the planetary carrying capacity long term in terms of ecological footprint in balance?
Okay, so I mean, as I said, ideally, I think it would be best to use half the planet's capacity, and that would also make things more robust against like changing conditions. We use now 1.7, so you could say 3 times less than what we have right now on average. If you also feel that everybody should have the opportunity to have materially as comfortable of a life as you, then you can also look at what's your resource demand compared to world average. I would say probably on average, I would say probably people in this group have 3 to 4 times more resource consumption than world average. So that would add another factor 4. If you think everybody should have the right to live like you, then you can multiply 4 by 3. That's 12. So it's 12 times less than today. That's good. That's one way of just using the numbers that we offer. But we just use a count, so you can start to make these speculations and calculations. I don't know if that's what you're looking for.
Okay, Simon, did that answer your question, Simon? Okay, Steve, you have a question?
Yeah, Mathis, in all your research that you've been doing on this, on your bio-sustainable, the future, what would you say is probably one of the more positive things that you've been coming across, one of the more positive signs? And then what is the thing that worries you the most?
Well, I don't know about the second one. What are positive things? I mean, what I'm most excited about and where I see potential is that some people start to recognize that the sustainability transformation is actually aligned with their incentives, that preparing yourself for the inevitable future is of benefit to you and is the greatest benefit you can bring to the world. People give prepping a very negative name, and prepping is kind of a derogative bunker mentality, while in reality, the most effective preparations are the ones that are replicable. Like if you prepare yourself by saying, I have to move to New Zealand, it may be nice for you, but it's not a replicable strategy. Not all 8 billion people can move to New Zealand. Everything will be fine. And it's a mutually exclusive strategy. But insulating your house, learning how to live on fewer resources makes you more secure and is replicable. So in some ways, it's a strategy that also will be more likely succeed for you. So actually preparing in the most effective ways has so many win-win opportunities. And what I'm also excited about is kind of to see that in countries that have ecological extra capacity, we call them countries with biocapacity reserves, they're starting to realize that they actually have an advantage, and that just liquidating their assets as they have been doing historically, like in South America, the whole logic is to say, it's called the right to develop. Right to develop means we just chop down all the resources and make money, and then we have money, like the Swiss did. That this is actually not a very good strategy. That actually they may actually be truly rich, and that they have to manage that carefully. So I'm not saying this is a fully winning perspective yet, but in my conversations, I can see the lights go on, and kind of the enthusiasm for that perspective get much, much stronger. While in countries that have ecological deficits, the story is still seen as a burden, and it's a compliance story, and everybody shies away from it, and everybody thinks we would need to do it, but push comes to shove, let's not rock the boat. So they limit their own thinking through their own fear and worries, rather than looking straight at the context we live in and actually understanding what's in their interest. It's a bit of a convoluted answer, but I mean,
no, thank you. I appreciate the insight. I think there's a lot of in the future. There's going to be a lot of move towards efficiencies with electric generation demand. I just think we could probably cut 20-25% of energy use just being more efficient with it, a lot more efficient with it. And that, of course, you have to change your lifestyle a bit, but that's better than the alternative.
I think that so this may sound too soft, but I think soft is good. I think Andrii kind of likes soft too. So what's the most significant policy question that you need to ask yourself before you think of any solution? And now I say that as an engineer. And that question is, do you love people? And do you love people is actually a functional question. I'm not asking you to love people. I'm just asking you whether you love people. Because if you don't love people, stay at home and drink tea, until you feel cozy. Because what you will think up will be things that just create more conflicts. If you see others as the problem, it's very unlikely to get them excited to move in different things. And the policies you create are cynicism machines that you feel resentful for others not following your dreams and orders. So I think we need to focus far more on things saying, if like coming from the place, if you actually love people, what do you want? Like, do you want them to succeed? How do you help them to succeed? Helping them to succeed, to be resource secure. If they fail to do that, you can feel empathy for them. Oh my God, they're not prepared, poor them, rather than, oh my God, they're not fulfilling what I'm telling them to do. So I hate them and I feel cynical, and I won't take short showers anymore either because they don't, and so screw them all. So actually it's something, so maybe it's too simple, but I think in the end it's about how do we generate intrinsic motivation, because the society as a whole doesn't see the sustainability transformation as necessary. So imitating others gets us into a totally wrong track. We need to generate intrinsic motivation that people fall in love with, saying, wow, this transition, I want that, independent of what others want. Actually realizing that the less others want it, the more important it is for them. That stabilizes society.
All right, so we'll do Dusty Green and then Charlie, and then I'm hoping we can see Simon's presentation. Okay, Dusty Green, go ahead.
Yep. Wow, Mathis, that was really good. The love people part is really important. Just to be purely frank and a little bit contrary.
That's wonderful.
Another view. Maybe from a place of exactly what you described, a lot of people feeling this attack. I've been in this kind of space for a while, and I've often been sort of politically, so not politically, but a different mindset than many people in this space. And so I often feel on the outside. But what I've seen over and over and over again is when people don't have that love people focus, and they get what I call kind of like clipboard brain, and everything is a problem to solve. And I've many, many times run across a very genocidal, suicidal bent towards humanity, and they just want to call. I've had actually people like threaten me and say pretty scary things online, and just wanting to call as much of humanity as they can. And if like, for example, if you had said what you just said now, or didn't say, sorry, and just showed the chart that shows we need 12x less, someone like me would just initially hear you and think, okay, he wants there to only be 500 million, or so it can become, there's a slippery slope to that sort of only a very clinical problem solving mind. And my question, I guess, is how can, other than just like the statements you made, like, I guess that's really the answer, kind of, is people loving people is maybe part of the answer of how more people can see the need for this without going to a genocidal mentality.
That's very good. Perhaps a little, I don't know if it's a tangent to what we're saying, or one aspect, but I think it will come together, hopefully, is one word that has always, or concept that has always irked me, and I didn't really know why, is the word solution. Because solution has no subject. Who does it? And solution also has this idea of neutralizing the problem. Oh, there's a solution, so the problem is gone. And it's kind of this centralized, like, that's the solution, that's what you got to do, and then I tell you what to do that. And the wise person, she told me, like, that she found the other word, and now I feel more relaxed because I can use that word. She says a much better word to use is, what's your response? So the problem is the context so big, you cannot take on the whole problem. You can recognize it. It's the context in which we operate. So what's your response is a clear subject, but there's no right and wrong. How do you react to the soup you swim in? And then it becomes a more kind of human exposure. So yeah, I'm glad you actually pointed out the calculation, like kind of coming to the number 12. I just showed how the numbers can be used, but it's not an empowering way of using information. I think one of my transformational moments professionally was actually in 1995. We got, like, the footprint was developed. I went on tour, I gave lectures, even at Charlie's University, with whatever. We had these buttons that we got that said, reduce your footprint, and I proudly distributed 10,000 of them to people and everything, and could have the buttons. At the end of a lecture in Chile, a young lady put up her hand. She said, why should I reduce my footprint? So that you can eat more chocolate? And that was like, wow, thank you so much. This trip was totally worth it. Like, I traveled half around the world to kind of hear something really transformational. I mean, in the sense of saying she clearly could speak to that, like what others didn't dare to say. That actually what's in it for me in some way. And so I have stopped back then saying reduce your footprint. Actually, I adamantly would recommend anybody not to tell anybody to reduce the footprint. I'm telling them to increase their resource security.
Oh, okay. That's good. That's good. All right.
Do you eat any less chocolate?
And I'm eating the chocolate. I continue to eat chocolate.
Huh? You
He's continuing to eat
eat a
chocolate.
lot of chocolate?
Particularly like when who asked? Was it Steve who asked what I'm worried about? Then I eat chocolate.
Okay, Charlie. After your question, Simon is going to present. Okay. Oh, Charlie, you muted
Charlie.
yourself. Oh, or you got muted. You got to unmute, Charlie. Yeah, go ahead.
I raised my hand to answer Steve's question, but I want to add something very quickly to the most recent discussion, which is if we're get humanity to survive, at what expense is that to the rest of the biosphere? And so there's a trade-off there as well with how much of humanity, including none, versus the rest of the biosphere. But I'm not going there. To answer, Steve asked the question, what really worries him? And the reason I raised my hand was I just gave a talk to the Canadian Club of Rome, a rather interesting group that continues to, that I often tune into. And I gave a talk that was called What Really Worries Me. And in the short term, it's this. A decline in EROI must lead to an increase in the price of fuels, let's just say oil, leads to an increase in the price of oil. An increase in the price of oil leads to an increase in the price of everything else, because everything requires oil to be made in today's world. And an increase in everything is viewed as inflation. And people view inflation not as anything to do with how I think about it, but as the failure of their leaders. And a failure of their leaders means the world becomes increasingly impossible to govern. And as I listen to the news or read the news, it seems that the world is indeed becoming increasingly impossible to govern. And I also get this from reading Mathis Ahmed's work, especially his little book. And so I think what worries me, Steve, in the short term anyway, is we are making a world increasingly impossible to govern. And God knows what kind of chaos we're going to have in the next 4 years in our country. But you look at what's going on in France and Canada and every place else. And not to mention the traditional places in Latin America. I think the world is becoming increasingly difficult due to resource issues, all the issues Simon studies, and you too, and that people don't have a clue.
I think the economic
because we don't teach biophysical economics is the root cause.
Yes. I think it's more than even inflation. I would say the impact is stagflation. So the inflation is like it gets harder to fill the stores, so it gets more expensive. It's not just leaders failing, as you say, Charlie. It's good, the governance issue, and because our assets are not prepared for that future, the value of the assets diminishes as well. So we're burning the candle from both ends. So, but by actually recognizing the context of overshoot, we could avoid that if we choose so, and it doesn't. The avoidance doesn't depend on others understanding it. That's the good news. You can start yourself independently of what the others do, and if the others actually don't do anything, it's even more valuable to do the right thing yourself in some ways. So it doesn't save the whole thing, but you can build islands of survivability, and that's good for humanity as well. It's not a selfish thing to do. It's actually a positive contribution.
Yeah, and
Well,
I want
Charlie, well, consider this: if Trump goes out and buys all the countries and regions, and they're all under the U.S. umbrella, we'll be one happy family. There won't be any more geopolitics. So that's something. Yeah. That's positive. It's always going to be positive.
Wonderful.
Well, yeah, I just wanted to say to Charlie's maths that point that biophysical economics, that it's good, like Mathis was saying, to educate the people about the biophysical economics, and it would be really great if our leaders and politicians started to admit that, because if they're willing to be truthful about the reality of our biophysical limits, then people could trust them more, because they could also do that research. But okay, I wanted to move on to Simon doing the presentation.
Could I say just one quick thing?
Okay.
This group, and this is the perfect time, and it's short. We had a society, International Society of Biophysical Economics, which was very, very successful for about 10 years, 15 years, and is now moribund. It needs a new leader. We're about to fold it, but if there is such a leader, I'd like you to talk to me. And we can see whether we can possibly, by including these people here, it was a very successful group for a dozen years, but it needs a young leader, and somebody with energy and so forth, and more clout. And this group might have that somewhere in them. I don't know. Mathis, I see you nodding your head.
I agree. There's somebody in this group, and all the people who are watching this later. So I'm sure it's a great job at advertising.
and anyone watching on YouTube, feel free to apply.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right, Simon, are you ready there?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I don't have a presentation, but what I do have to show is what I'm working on. It is kind of pertinent. How do I share? Start screen sharing window. All right. Okay, the first thing. Okay, can you see this screen?
Yes.
So conventional circular economy, can you see that? Yeah, is that what you're seeing? All right. So what this is actually the work that I'm doing with Peter Sternlich. This is the Hawaii report, which is approaching first draft stage to be handed out for review very soon. Some people on this call will receive a draft saying, look at it, if you can. Looking at you, Charlie. So anyway, so what the purpose of this work was to determine what was the relationship between the circular economy and the green transition. Because when you often sort of hear stuff here that people just talk about it, it's assumed to be the same thing. It's not. Right, and what resources are involved. Right, so the state of Hawaii, and eventually what we're chasing is what minerals should we be chasing? Because at the moment, what we're instructed to do in terms of minerals to chase, they're all based on the way the world is at the moment on technology that won't last very long. Right, so I've looked at what technology might come in and what minerals will be used from there. Anyway, so for the state of Hawaii, the circular economy is if we get all waste products, collect them and recycle all of them. based on recycling performance of a network of recycling plants in the United Kingdom. What can come in and what can come out based on the waste that society produces, matched up against. Yes, Andrii. What's?
Oh yeah, it's just we're still seeing the conventional circular economy. I don't know if you're still on the same page.
No, that's the table.
Or...
It's actually a section in the report. These are the
okay.
numbers. The top here is to catch all waste, and I mean all waste in Hawaii at the moment. We need 42 plants. Right.
Okay.
Now, if we were to apply the green transition in its conventional form, and each unit had a 20-year working life, so in 2045, the first generation of solar panels and wind turbines started to come offline to be recycled. We need what's that? 9 recycling plants to catch all that. And if we were to catch all car tires produced and recycle them into diesel fuel, and if we were to get all human sewage generated and turn it into syngas, now we're talking about another 2, so a total of 53 recycling plants of various ranges. Okay, that's the circular economy. The green transition, this is the infrastructure list for the green transition. Right, now we're talking about, we're going to take the transport fleet of Hawaii, and it's either going to be an electric vehicle or a hydrogen fuel cell. Then we've got the aviation, which will go biofuel. And then we've got the domestic maritime shipping fleet. Okay, all of that, we need this amount of infrastructure. And then down the bottom here is electricity generation. So we're going to go from fossil fuels to green transition, solar panels, wind turbines, and what have you. The point of this is the green transition is orders of magnitude larger than the circular economy. As in, it's much larger. Now, the circular economy, because we don't control manufacture, we've only got part of the circular economy. So the whole idea of the circular economy in its current form is not only thermodynamically imbalanced, but we have only got part of it. So this is to show the relationship between the two. And that's if we were to do things this way. Okay, stop sharing that one. Now we go to, where is it? Okay. So now we've got a graph on screen.
Yep, I see it.
All right. So this is power generated across the year. The far left-hand side is what Hawaii does now, where the red is oil. They burn oil to make electricity. So now that's just for electricity generation. These 2 columns here are the green transition. If we were to apply the first column is what's legal in Hawaii at the moment. They won't allow a nuclear power plant, and we can't really expand much in geothermal. Right. So if we were to do that, this is if we were to contract the system according to resource depletion. If we were to contract the system, what would that look like? And then the purple transition is over here, and the purple is if we actually applied thorium molten salt. So we had the dominant power structures in our thorium molten salt and geothermal for Hawaii. Now where it gets interesting. This is the installed infrastructure. Okay, so what you're seeing here is the installed power generation capacity for those scenarios. So the far left-hand side with the red, that's what's in place now, and that only does electricity. In the middle one here, that's the existing green transition. That little grey box is we're going to install a single small-scale nuclear power plant. And so the difference in availability, we have a 5 gigawatt capacity saving by doing that. If we were to go to the purple transition, it is now 1/5 of the size. Now, the footprint of that, this one here is 27 million solar panels. That's the yellow. And 275 wind turbines of 6.6 megawatt capacity, backed by several thousand power storage buffer units. This here has no buffer units, and it's the equivalent of 51 shipping containers. With another, that's the reactors, and each reactor would have a power turbine next to it, which is another shipping container. So 100 shipping containers. The footprint is smaller. Now this one here, we're doing power, transport of all kinds, and some recommendations for manufacture. What I'm saying here is I've now got a path to reduce the human footprint without actually reducing activity. We're going to reduce activity as well, which will reduce things even further. We are on the path now for degrowth to actually happen. All right, stop sharing that one. And now let me just get the next one. I'll be interested in Steve's opinion on all this if he's still here.
Yeah,
I am. I did want to ask you and beg my ignorance. What is in that purple? You said 50 shipping containers. What are those power units?
Okay, let's go to that.
Thank you.
I always like your question, Steve. All right. So, where are we? Share again. So this, Steve, this is actually coming out to review soon, and so I'm hoping this will come to you in a okay. So, are you seeing a table of contents?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So this, boys and girls, is the purple transition. So if we were to apply the purple transition in full across the state of Hawaii, what would that look like? Okay. Here's the basic foundation of what's called, at the very center of things, there's a reinvented commodity sector. The circular economy is now evolved into what is called the resource balanced economy, where we manage our resources properly, and there's an energy term to check whether something is sensible to do rather than should we do it. All right. Around that, we've got these 5 technologies, most of which are several decades old. That purple, Steve, is this one, thorium molten salt. So let's go down. Come on. I went through the numbers. I actually sort of just present the numbers for everything. Like if you were to actually do this, what would it be?
It is amazing your encyclopedia mind to be able to construct all this. It is truly amazing.
This to me is the simple. This is the simple version. All right. So that what you're seeing there, Steve, is a picture of a Copenhagen's Atomics full-sized unit. It's actually a test unit, right? But that's how big they'll be. That unit will produce 100 megawatts of thermal power at a 560 degrees Celsius, or 40 megawatts of electricity. To do that, you have a second unit about the same size next to it with a steam turbine. So we're talking about 2 shipping containers that arrive on a truck. And in that shipping container is about 50 years of fuel, but there's a 5-year maintenance cycle where they come and strip out all the parts. Now, and there's me wearing a tie. Yeah. Okay. So to do this, these are the tasks, right? That's gone through. Steve, you'll have all this. You can go. In fact, I'm hoping you can go through this with a blowtorch and a red pen. So if we were to, that's the energy split. Okay. So the energy split as it was in 2020. Okay, that needs to be fixed. It should be 2019. But now we're going to go to, this is the amount of power that we need to generate. So we need 21.3 terawatt hours, where 66% of it is now going to come from thorium molten salt, and 27% will come from geothermal energy. Again, both of those require a legislation change in Hawaii. Whether that happens or not, that's another thing. Okay, here's what we're looking at. To deliver that thermal heat, we need 52, as in 5-2, thorium molten salt units. Right, so to put that all together, that is 104 shipping containers. That's the footprint of the energy stuff for Hawaii. And to put it all together, okay. So what you're looking at here is in the center, we've got the resource balanced economy, and around that, we've got to wrap down a series of tasks, and those tasks go out to applications. Where human sewerage, and the whole thing is driven by the energy sources of thorium and human sewerage. So the phrase "there's money in shit" is back again.
And so, Simon, I don't want to bog you down in the details. In the research I've done, the thorium molten salt. This is a test reactor you're showing here. Is this
a test reactor?
So is it? When do they think the commercial application would, if the testing goes well, when do they think the commercial application would be available?
2028 is the information I've got, but I know there's lobbying groups trying to slow that down. Opposing that, there's two opposing forces. One is the Chinese now have multiple systems, including one on a ship. And the other one is the American Department of Homeland Security is working on something in this, and they claim it's secret squirrel, but a few people know about it. The answer is, of course, it's not here yet. And yes, it's experimental. If you don't want to go this path, then you're back with solar panels and wind turbines.
Oh no, I don't think the solar panel and wind turbines are long-term sustainable. But you would think the Chinese would be taking this as fast as they can because they continue to ramp up coal.
Yeah, I've got an answer to that. So, oh, you're frozen. Whoops, you there? Yeah. So I was in Hong Kong, and I was presenting to a group of venture capitalists, and there were Chinese officials from the PRC government in the room. So I had a chat to them, a couple of them, and they gave me a number of interesting insights. Some of them were downright scary. I was suspecting that they were laughing at me. One of them was, where's that? Stop share. Stop share. Okay. One of them was their approach to this is they don't know what the future holds. As far as they're concerned, they know coal works, and they know they personally control a lot of coal. They also know it's a finite resource. So they're ramping up coal to ramp up their industrial capacity to the express end of gaining control in an empire context of the rest of the world. As in, they want to own and control outright everything industrial on planet Earth, where the Han Dynasty in particular controls, not just the Chinese, the Han Dynasty. Now, they understand that that is a short-term strategy. So in addition to that, they have put their hat on, I think it's like 40 or 50 different technologies, where thorium molten salt is just one. And instead of saying, we now will back one technology and put a trust in that for the future, they say, we will back all technologies. And they're backing them with serious money. Hundreds of millions of US dollars has been pumped into each one, and they're treating it as a horse race. And a failure of a technology where they lose 200 or 300 million is quite okay if it tells them the answer. And so they're out the gates, and they're aggressively chasing all technologies. And it's what the Americans should have done when the fracking revolution kicked off in 2008. But, yeah.
Okay, I wanted to get Mathis's response to Simon's presentation, and then Dusty had a question. Mathis?
My response is more, I would love to see the study more in full, like I don't have enough context to kind of
fair enough.
Okay,
fully understand, but I'd love to see it. Like fascinating.
Okay, all right, Dusty.
Yeah, and just to add to this, Simon, have you seen the recent news of per AI, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and Meta all backing SMRs? And then I think just recently, just a few days ago, OpenAI, Sam Altman, they backed Oklo, which is a molten salt, which can potentially run on thorium too.
Yep.
So
the best solution is not just thorium. It seems to be a cocktail of thorium, uranium, and spent nuclear fuel. That seems to be the best cocktail to most efficient. So when I started this journey a couple of years ago, it felt like if you said the word thorium molten salt, it felt like saying peak oil 15 years ago. Burn him at the stake. Heresy, I say. You batshit crazy conspiracy theory nutter. Yeah, right. So but now what's happened is, so the work I've done is done in sequence. First was look at fossil fuels, probably not going to work. Look at green transition, as in, will it work? And it says, that won't work. Now I'm proposing this as a counter plan with the understanding I'm chasing what raw materials, in terms of when I tell my management back with the group I work with, what minerals should they be looking for and where do they get them from and why? And that's the whole purpose of this work. So I'm pushing forward with this sort of stuff, but the sequence of events was the green transition won't work. Like it really won't. Like the materials that we think we're going to use at the moment, the vast amount of lithium, the vast amount, the technology that we've got on the ground works on a small scale, but when you scale it up, there are blind spots there. Anyway, so that has become apparent, and the people who want to back all the data fusion centers that are coming out, all the infrastructure associated with that, have finally done the math, and they've worked out that their data fusion centers, which they're trying to roll out all over the world to manage all this 5G stuff, which is a can of worms. They've finally done the math, and they've realized that overnight that solar panels won't work. And so overnight they said, well, SMRs are now the answer. And literally, it was like throwing a switch. You don't get burned at the stake at dinner parties for saying the word molten salt modular reactors anymore.
Well, that's great. That's great.
Watch what they do, not just what they say. That's what I have to say about that.
So yeah. Anyway, and so what's in the comments from the iron powder? That's to replace coal, because a lot of our manufacture requires heat up around the 1500 to 2000 degrees centigrade thermal gradient, whereas what comes out of standard nuclear is only 300 degrees, 200 to 300, and geothermal's about there too. And we need, without coal, much of our existing manufacture sector just stops. And so the iron powder was to replace that. But what's interesting is that iron powder can be recycled in a hydrogen atmosphere or a syngas atmosphere, and that syngas can be gotten from pyrolysis of human sewage. So now there's a link between the waste product of a human society and recycling of a metal fuel. So then the question is, all right, we've got heat now, what do we do with that heat? And so, yeah. Anyway, so this is work that's relatively new. I seem to be the only one that's doing it, which means while that is the case, it's slow. It's about to be published and sent out, which means everyone's got it. Everyone's got it. Yes, actually, and something for Mathis. Where is it? So, you know how we've got the idea of there's plastics in the sea, and that's a real problem. Like there's 3 or 4 very serious ecological problems that are coming from industrial waste, and one of them is plastic. Are you seeing that appendix new?
Yes.
Okay, this is coming. This will be available for everyone. Okay, I'm going somewhere with this. This is the great big plastic garbage patch in the Pacific Ocean. Mm-hmm. It's about the size of Texas, and it's about 30 feet deep. It just happens to be, there's Hawaii right there. Hawaii is right next to it.
Oh, wow.
Right? Is that right? Okay. So when we're actually trying to clean garbage out of the sea in the past, you've got a ship full of plastic. Now what? And so the logistics of getting that back to land, getting it unloaded, it just all fell apart. So I've put forward the idea, and there's 5 major gyres around the world, but the biggest one is just off Hawaii. So what I'm suggesting is you take an oil tanker. So these are the numbers I've just gone through. Come back here. Come on. Bear with me, guys. Okay, we're going to take an oil tanker, a big ship. It's kitted out to carry oil already. Rip out some of the oil tanks, but not all. So there's our oil tanks. Put one of these thorium reactors on board. Now we've got all the energy we'll need. And in place of some of those oil tanks, we're going to put a pyrolysis plant. And that pyrolysis plant, well, 4 of them in a row. And so I've done some numbers, and I've got a process flow sheet. So here's your flow sheet going through it. Now, with these pyrolysis plants and recycling, the problem is getting enough material up to them in a consistent fashion. We've got the biggest pile of plastic in the world, and currents are pushing it together. This ship could go through that guy like a lawnmower, up and back, up and back, up and back, and it'll catch that stuff. And by having the pyrolysis plant on the ship, we're seeing a 95% reduction in volume. It gets compressed down to pyrolysis oil. And so that pyrolysis, so we've got to separate out plastics down to 1 nanometer in scale. And so we've got a series of separation techniques, and how much energy they consume and all that. And you've got to do a mass balance. And so what you end up with is, okay, so that's the actual idea. Let me get you the numbers. The numbers it's something like okay, circular economy. There we are. This one again. Share screen. What I'm trying to present to you is a solution to a serious problem, an ecological problem.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So we drop down to okay, there's the circular economy footprint. Ah, come on, you're killing me. Where is it?
Oh, I know Charlie also has a question. Charlie, did you want to ask?
I'm trying to get you a number.
Okay.
If we were to, here we go.
Sure.
Daily production. So if this ship was to pull out 40 tons of waste and strip it, clean it down to 1 nanometer, we could produce, when you go through all the distillation steps, 5,447 gallons of diesel fuel a day. Now that one ship going up and down that patch there, if it was able to do that, and if it was to work 350 days a year, which is probably a bit excessive, but all right, let's say that happened, that one ship could clear the entire garbage patch in 6.2 years. Wow. Now, the cost of doing this is negligible. This is not expensive stuff, and oil tankers will be really easy to get hold of very soon. Right, so we make a fleet of these, say 10 or 20 of them. They will very quickly clean the plastics out of the ocean, and we turn that into diesel fuel. Now, the energy return on energy invested ratio is about 2.1. So it's positive, but only just. But what we're doing is we are cleaning a major ecological problem, and we're offsetting the cost of doing that. That fuel can be then taken back to Hawaii. If, say, the Hawaiian government does this, they could use that diesel fuel to run vital infrastructure, emergency services. So, but what it means is they control the entire value chain. You're not waiting on a ship coming from Saudi Arabia with your oil anymore.
Simon, I have to tell you, all these different solutions, that's I think one of the better ones that we could do. And okay. I had no idea that you said it's the size of Texas and it's 30 feet deep.
It is 30 feet deep in some places.
I did not know it was that big.
It's huge. Oh, it gets some of the weirdest shit, like 8% of all the plastics going into the ocean come from one source, the Yangtze River mouth.
And it ends up there.
And all the sea, all around the world, all the mass, like it's something like 8 million tons of plastic goes into the ocean. 8% of that comes from one river.
Wow. Well, yeah, it's like that 80-20 rule. So
you Muppets.
Mathis, I think Simon wanted your reaction.
If he's got one, that is.
Oh, if you got one. No. Okay.
Wonderful. I mean, do you know the concentration? Do you know the amount of plastic that is there? I think it's very dispersed. That's kind of
It's
one of
very,
the
it's very
issues.
dispersed. It's very dispersed. There's an estimated 87,000 tons in the northern gyre of the Pacific. Now, it's been concentrated by ocean currents. So the idea is on the front of the ship, you've got a big scoop, and that scoop collects everything in, and you plow through, and that scoop goes down 30 feet into the water, so we're catching everything. And we will go through that there, and the force of the ship going forward will collect everything, and that's the feedstock for the plant.
And when you say energy return on investment, does that include the energy it takes to run the ship?
Yes. Yes.
Because that's a lot.
So this is a if you've got a thorium reactor on board, we're actually using only a fraction of the energy that's actually available in that reactor. So then the question is, can we have a smaller reactor? And I think the Chinese are looking at that. But the amount of, and you either run the reactor or you don't, right? So there's a few things to work out here. The Copenhagen atomic business model is you don't buy the reactor, you rent it, and they sell the power at 2 cents a kilowatt. If that is the case, we can make diesel fuel for an estimated 24 cents a gallon. Hardy ha 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 ho ho. So what this has to happen is more engineering needs to be done to actually sort of nail this down. This is an idea, right? You need to actually take it from a scoping concept to, say, a pre-feasibility level before we can start answering questions properly. But the concept, the plastics are being concentrated by ocean currents. So if you plow through the plastic, behind the ship, the clear channel closes up. So you could go over the same patch of ocean and the plastic's brought to the ship. And it just keeps going and going and going and going till it runs out of plastic. And so
you've got your supply right there.
Right there.
You're not drilling down in the ground or fracking. It's there to scoop up, which is an easy deal.
This is actually written up in full, Steve. This will be your personal sandpit to play in a couple of days' time. I'd be very interested in your opinion. You too,
I look forward to that because I think a lot of people will be interested to see how we could solve something like that. Even though, let's say it costs money, it's not a lot of money, but at least the energy return on investment is somewhat positive, which is a plus.
Yeah. So the other when we've looked at this problem before, it costs a lot of money, and to get a recycling plant going, you need large quantities of material that's of consistent form brought to it in a consistent way. And the logistics of getting a ship full of plastic from the middle of the ocean back to shore, getting it unloaded, getting it out to it all broke down. So take the process plant to the patch. And if you do something like have a second ship come out and collect the oil and the syngas produced,
it's like plastic whaling, essentially.
Yeah. Yes.
And so the ship can sit there, and it can go up and down there like a lawnmower. Especially if you start using automated technology, there'd be less crew on board, and you have the crew change, and it could just sit there till it's done. And so what I'm sort of saying is a very serious ecological problem starts to reverse. And I'm putting a series of solutions on the ground to seriously, let's cut the crap and change some of these problems.
I think a lot of people would be happy to do that, even if it cost them taxpayer money. Seriously, I think it's something positive, as what Mathis says. This is a positive solution.
Well, it's about to be handed to the government of Hawaii.
Nice.
And anyone else who gets there first.
So Charlie has a question, and Dusty, and then Steve has a couple of slides to share.
Yeah, that's it for me, Andrii.
Okay. Okay. Charlie, you're muted.
Simon.
I had three questions on Hawaii, but first, the city of Syracuse generates some significant portion, a quarter or something, of its electricity from burning trash. And the idea of why not put a net in the Yangtze River, at the mouth of the Yangtze River, drag the stuff out, dry it right there on land, and put it into a electricity generating plant, the technology of which is already working very well in Syracuse, thank you. And that's just another way of doing it. Now, my questions about Hawaii. One, why Hawaii? Two, I was confused by the bars being of all different heights. And I thought I'm trying to compare the different, I think, technologies that you're doing. And number three, what is the material of generating 1,000 megawatt hours or whatever of electricity from wind turbines and solar PV, the material required versus a thorium reactor? I was expecting that comparison when you were done. So, one, why Hawaii?
Simon, you're muted.
There's a bit of a story behind this. So I work for the Geological Survey of Finland, and we were to look at strategic long-term objectives, insight, foresight. Now, I was of the opinion that what we call the European Union, or EU 28 at the time, was going to break up. There's a number of problems there. In its place, a number of power blocks could form, and one of those power blocks, I think, will be the Nordic frontier. Finland, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Greenland, hopefully, Iceland, right? And so it's not an alliance between political countries, it's an alliance between industrial clusters across those countries. How big is the circular economy? So the plan was to do an assessment report in each one of these countries. One of those countries is Iceland, and because of its geothermal capability, it's decisively important whether this will work or not. Okay, so now the problem with dealing with the Nordic countries is they are absolutely convinced they've got their solution in hand. They know.
Yeah, I've got it. Hawaii geothermal. Okay.
No,
now,
the reason I wanted to enter Hawaii was it's to test the methods far outside.
Simon, you got muted. Sorry.
To test the units far outside of Nordia. Hawaii is mostly oil. They use oil to generate electricity, which doesn't really happen anywhere else, not at that scale. The entire economy is dependent on tourism, and they're a heavily fossil fuels dependent culture. So Hawaii is at the extreme end of over the skis of what do we do to phase out fossil fuels. So I was to test and develop ideas there, and then come back to Nordia and said, you guys need to sort your shit out. So that's why Hawaii. Okay, number two, there are 9 scenarios looked at. Each one's a policy. A policy one is everything's electrified. Okay, that's one. And another boundary condition is everything's hydrogen. Okay.
Who made these policies?
So no. I made a scenario. You need to read the report, Charlie. I think you need to see the report.
Okay.
Okay.
We'll send you the report.
Okay.
So,
well, I have a friend who's politically potent in Hawaii who will be very interested in this. His name is Richard Ha.
Yep, he's on the list. I've already got him.
Okay, good.
So anyway, to basically answer your question, each scenario was to represent a policy path going forward, right? And one of them is the conventional green transition, and making hydrogen is different. Like each path, hydrogen, ammonia, fossil fuels, biofuels, they all have a different energy footprint. Right, so if you're going to assemble them in different combinations, you have a different energy requirement for the whole system. But there's trade-offs. There's trade-offs everywhere. So that's why you're seeing the difference in height. When you're seeing the amount of installed capacity difference, each power generation system also has a different footprint. Like solar power worldwide has an average productivity net connectivity of 11.4%. So as in they're producing power 11.4% of the time. We got data from Hawaii to show how much would it be if it was in Honolulu. And using data actually measured there and by one of the local energy experts, we got 19.2% for Hawaii. Okay. So if you put that next to a nuclear reactor that has a 91.5% availability, you've got gigawatt for gigawatt, a far more efficient situation, right? So you need a much smaller footprint for, say, a nuclear power plant than you do for solar panels, because the solar panels aren't operating most of the time, whereas the nuclear plant is. And again, so that's another difference there. So this is where all these differences are coming from. Now, as for the material quantities of each one, I can do that for the green transition. I can't do that for the thorium reactor, because when I actually asked them the material content of their thorium reactor, they laughed at me. Commercial secret. Beyond, a thorium reactor is mostly steel and exotic alloys of steel and nickel. You've got some, you do have some exotic components in them, but there's much less of them, and they tend to last for much longer than your conventional. Yeah, and so the material footprint of a thorium reactor, per gigawatt hour of power produced, like so over its working life, is much less. But how much less? I don't know, because they won't give you the numbers. It's experimental, and it's a commercial secret.
All right. So, okay, Dusty, and then Steve has a few slides.
Per the Hawaii plastic patch type scenario, have you looked into the nonprofit, the Ocean Cleanup, and their method of sort of netting? Have two ships net it and bring it to the main ship.
Yep. It's all good stuff. There's many ways to skin a cat, and the only thing they have in common is they're hard on cats. The idea here was to actually sort of turn this over to a university, a master's students group, and actually get them to do a master's students to get this idea and do the engineering for it, and all bets are off, and we'll see many different solutions. Yes, the Ocean Cleanup Group, I actually referenced them. They're pretty good. The idea was to put this idea out for everyone, and everyone could have it, so someone will do it. I tried to get this idea commercialized. I tried to publish it, and they said, "Oh, the technology here is all 50 years old. None of it's new. Go away." Oh, charming. And then you go before the venture capitals groups, and they'll say, "Oh, great idea. We can make money. I like your thinking." I don't hear from them again. And then you follow up from them. You say, "Yeah, nice idea, but we're going to have to cut you out if we're going to take this idea. Maybe we'll do it, maybe we won't. But we want exclusive rights to the idea, so no one else can take it." And it says, "You shower of assholes." Right.
Oh
So
my
now
God.
this goes into a report as an appendix in full. It is documented in full, and everyone can have it. And if someone gets rich off that, that's great. It probably won't be me, but at least everyone's now got it, which means someone might do it.
Well, send me an email of what you got, and if one of my YouTuber buddies want to make a video on it,
Okay.
so get it out there better.
I can send you a copy of the draft report, and you can look at the whole thing.
Yeah, if you guys send me your slides, I'll just put them in the description below the YouTube video. All right. So, Steve, you had a couple slides you wanted to share?
Yeah, just really quickly, because
Okay,
it was Mathis had an excellent report, and appreciate what Simon's doing. And so what we're trying to all as humans is to do it some sort of transition, whatever that transition is, to a more bio-sustainable future. And that really depends upon what we're burning in fossil fuels. And now Charles knows Jean Le Herrera, and he put out a new, how do I share this again? I always forget.
So the third button at the bottom.
More actions.
Start screen sharing.
Okay. Yep. Right there. Okay.
And the full
I guess
screen.
Full screen, entire screen.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you see it now?
No.
Uh,
I also.
Here we go.
Okay, good. Mm-hmm.
Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay.
HL of monthly shale gas production.
Yeah. And what
does that
really
mean?
Okay, what has kept the world going is U.S. shale oil and gas production. GDP is based on energy growth. And so basically, it was the U.S. shale oil and gas industry that supplied almost 85% of the growth since the 2008 financial crisis. Now, what Jean is showing is this is the calculation, it's Hubbard linearization of monthly shale gas production. And what this does, the line gives you an idea of the total possible reserves for U.S. shale gas. And what it's showing is this line, and he updated the brown area, that's July 23 to November 24th, the brown dots. The dotted line is going towards a little more than 550 trillion cubic feet. Now, if I look at the next chart, do you see both charts here?
No, I just see the one. I think that you may have selected the window instead of the
Okay.
screen.
Okay, stop sharing. Let me go back then. I apologize. Okay, entire screen.
Yeah.
Do you see it now?
No, unfortunately.
Okay.
You might have to share the window.
Okay, let's do the window, and now I have this one shown. Do you see the two charts?
Yes, I see the two charts. Yep.
Okay, basically, when you take that 550 trillion cubic feet and you plot it from what the production has already been, what I'm trying to show here is any kind of future transition or future movement that we're going to have to do, we don't have a lot of time because whether we're going to wean off of fossil fuels manually, or it's going to happen to us. And I think it's going to happen to us. So what Jean is showing is that right now we are at the peak of U.S. shale gas production. And he's waiting for the next 3-4 months. It'll reconfirm this trend. It might be a little bit more. But if that's the case, this bounty of, as Charles has mentioned, this bounty of fuel that we've gotten for oil and gas, that is going to be running out, or we're going to be peaking. And so what Charles is explaining or worried about is the inflation. And so these are the kind of challenges we're going to be facing as we peak and start to have energy constraints. And it's going to make these challenges a bit more difficult. So.
Thanks for that. I wanted to say two things. One is that I got good news from Simon this week that he's finally going to have some time to look into my rural transition idea. Simon, I don't know if you had any chance to do that.
So this is starting to kick off. What I'm doing is I'm using Vaclav Smil's work. I'm using Vaclav Smil's work where if the idea is this: Hawaii has no humans on it, but we all arrive, but we organize the entire island chain around the idea of permaculture and regenerative agriculture. So we are now producing food with regenerative agricultural practices. The idea of we are now in and amongst the existing biodiversity biosystems, areas. There'll be corridors that will eventually become old growth forest, all that stuff. So food production merges with natural biosystems. Okay, if we were to do that, what's the footprint? And I'm using a model of the village where if we are going to feed 200 people, Andrew, we're going to use your word, the hamlet, and 200 people are going to come together in a group and they're going to grow food using permaculture and regenerative practices based on data that Vaclav Smil has collected. That how much arable land would they need to grow food sustainably across 1 year, with the idea that there's like a 30% of that land is allowed to go fallow, as in next year we're going to move the crops around. So there's areas that are permanent nature corridors that become old growth, but each of the food production areas, we're doing land stewardship and soil health and all that. Okay, so then well, how much land do we need for 200 people? and then extend that out to, well, how much arable land is there in Hawaii at the moment versus how much people is there at the moment? And roughly, if the numbers are holding, now I haven't actually really started this yet. I'm trying to take some leave before I really start. It's really going to start next week. But I can't help myself, so I've already started playing with the numbers. So it seems like each person needs something like half an acre, something like that
in Hawaii. Yeah,
in Hawaii, where the land is So this is actually highlighting the need to actually do this all over the world. You're not going to do this in Finland, where there's snow on the ground 6 months of the year.
Or you'd need more land.
It's completely different. But in Hawaii, where it's a tropical paradise, very, very rich soil, and historically, before Europeans turned up, they did actually sustain sort of numbers that are there now. Like the 1 to 1.5 million mark, depending on what source you look at. All right. So what it's saying is, what it's showing me is, what do we need to do that? Organic methods only, no petrochemical fertilizers. But what modern horticulture can tell us about what we know about agriculture at the moment, blend it all together, and what would Hawaii have to do that? Then there's the question of, well, how many people can the area support? And I initially thought that the Hawaii would have to actually reduce its population, but it turns out that the arable land in Hawaii is actually pretty good. And there's arable land to support the existing population if they did things differently. The existing crops would have to multiply by 10, though, as in the existing cropland would have to expand out. I've yet to work out, for example, I'm taking the CSIRO, which is a science group in Australia, well-being diet. How much food does the person need? 2,500 calories a day, and then working out from there. Right. So it seems like something like about 15 to 20% of the population will be needed to farm food. Right. And that's what petrochemical fertilizers are actually sort of doing at the moment, because farmers represent like a tiny fraction. So it'll be much more labor intensive. And this is some of the implications. What I'm trying to do is get this stuff interfaced into the purple transition and the circular economy. What would Hawaiian society look like? So this report is to be a sustainability Rosetta Stone. It's to look at all sustainability issues in one cross-referenced piece of work. And this is the final frontier.
Cool. Okay, thank you for that. I see we have two questions, one from Charlie. Okay, and then Ivor. Charlie, go ahead.
I spent a number of years studying shifting cultivation in the past. And Hawaii is very different because the soils are recent, because they're volcanic.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether your 30% is appropriate for Hawaii, but in most of the world, it's shifting cultivators, in sustainable shifting cultivation where you have that. You're using only about 10% of the land in any given year, and even less, so that the cycle has to be resting for 20 to 30 years if it's to be sustainable.
Right.
So be careful. I don't know whether the numbers you have of 30% in fallow, that just sounds unrealistically low for me. Maybe it works in Hawaii.
No, that wasn't an estimate of a number. It wasn't actually based on a study. It was based on talking to an organic farmer in Australia of, oh yeah, this is just what we do, but that doesn't mean they're sustainable. Come back in 30 years, do they still have a farm?
Yeah. They did shifting cultivation in Finland, and probably still do.
Yeah, and I wanted to add that the idea here.
But excuse me, if you need numbers on shifting cultivation, I can probably dredge them up from my past.
Yes, please. If you've got the time for that, I would very much appreciate that.
Yeah. The idea would be that the fallow would be planting food forests. Eventually, you won't need to clear anymore because you'll be getting enough from your food forests, and then you would be just cutting down things that don't produce as much, and to increase production.
Yeah, but all around the world, I mean, the problem, we did this in the context of estimating global carbon release from deforestation. And all around the world, the shifting cultivation is a moving front, moving into the virgin forests with civilization in various forms coming after that. And so it was just, except rarely, it was mostly just a phase in the ongoing onslaught on the virgin forests, not something that was truly sustainable. I mean, of course, it was in some places, but mostly it wasn't. It was sad.
Yeah. Oh, the historical examples would be like, or modern, like Kerala, India, where they have a lot of food forests, or Morocco.
Yes, good work by a guy named, I think it's Singh. I can't, but everybody's named Singh in India. But anyway, the really
Good job.
super nutrient studies and so forth. A very, very detailed analyses of shifting cultivation in India.
Ivor, you had a question?
Can I state something pretty obvious? Is Hawaii is surrounded by ocean, and I'll bet that high population when they were first contacted by the Europeans was because most of these people probably got half their calories from the ocean. I mean, the ocean is a large area around them, and it's got lots of food in it. So I think that's probably part of the reason that they were able to sustain such a high population.
Yeah, probably.
Okay.
One quick thing, my son does research on this in Hawaii. They had the fish ponds, and they figured a ballpark was 100-to-1 energy return on investment doing fish ponds in Hawaii. So humans could actually increase the energy return on investment using that kind of technology, simple technology, and maintaining it. So instead of using petroleum or natural gas getting high energy return on investments just from fossil fuels, we could see in certain areas around the world that humans could really increase their energy return on investment using these kind of wise practices.
Okay, and then just the last news I wanted to share this month was I made this. It's for people who want to investigate how peak oil decline works. So you can just kind of like modify these numbers here, and you see it'll update the projection or like change the sigmas, and then see how much oil we have left, and with the ultimate recoverable. And you can see just these are working with the historical data from John Peach, so that it has the
Andrii,
based
this
on
is
the
not good
discoveries.
news.
This is not good news. Well, the idea is it's kind of like you can play with this and see how peak oil works and how much longer we can have it for, and they're fairly realistic. So yeah, lias.ca/peak oil. And then the original one is, it's kind of like the best case scenario was if we start declining soon, then we can have it for longer. You see this but then we have this, then the decline in the 2030s, and pretty much all of the projections that I can run is very steep. We're going to have a very steep decline phase of the fossil fuels. So as I always say, we got to recognize the human right to land so that people can grow their own food and firewood, since right now 95% or something of food has fossil fuel inputs, and if it's going to be declining this fast, we may have high mortality.
That's for the globe. That's for the globe.
For the globe, yeah. This is global oil. Yes, this is global oil. This is all the oil that's been discovered, and then only 3 billion barrels were discovered last year, and it's projected to decline in future. So, this is there's other alternative, like Mathis was saying earlier, this alternative ultimate URR billion barrels. This is ultimately recovered resources, but those are based on speculative numbers. This is based on actual how much we've actually discovered. like around 2,200.
Well, you're just stewing oil. You're not, I mean, conventional oil. You're not doing
This is
fracked oil.
shale too. This includes shale.
Does it include natural gas liquids, which are going to
It
be
doesn't
very
include
important?
natural gas liquids.
Yeah, that's the ppm number at the beginning is very much based on a lot of gas use and coal.
I mean, that's why the United States, it gets a third of its oil from natural gas liquids.
Right. So
Wow.
so yeah, this isn't a perfect graph, but this shows
No, it
just
would be
the oil.
interesting to put the other ones in different colors.
Yes, if I was able to get that data, I would do it.
Well, we have that data. It's
Okay.
in the paper.
Send
done
it
with
over.
Jean Leray.
Yeah, if you can send it over, I would be happy to add it in. All right, I got questions from Jordan and then Dusty. Jordan, go ahead. You have to unmute. Okay, Jordan's having some trouble. Okay, how about you, Dusty? Go ahead.
That would be awesome to get that extra piece of data in there. That would be really cool to see. But just on a side question, when you played with that in different ways, what is typically the start of the decline? Is there
So
kind of an average?
the start of the decline is usually, well, I mean, the start of the decline is over here. You see the peak year. So I set it to 2025. That would give us the most optimistic estimates. You see, if I put it to 2028, then we only have enough oil until 2042. So the optimistic is that we start declining in 2025, and then we can have it for longer. But the steep decline is almost always in the 2030s. So when it's the minor decline, that's going to be like stagflation, and people are going to be grumbling. When it's going to be that steep decline part of the curve, that is we're talking much more serious. Here, hold on, Charlie. Okay, there. This is an example of historical oil declines. So see, when it was 2%, that was like Katrina. 3% was like the Libya war, and then the food price increase like about double the oil decline. So say, for instance, so there was a 12% food increase in the post-pandemic recovery, like I think 2 years in a row, and so or like at least 1 year in a row. And so if we have, say, for instance, over here, the maximum decline rate is based on Exxon. They said 15% is the maximum or the natural decline rate. So we could estimate that would be 30% year-on-year increase in food prices. Okay. Okay, Jordan, it seems like you unmuted. Did you want to try asking a question? Okay, we can't hear you. All right. So I think.
Can you hear me now?
Oh yes, I can hear you now.
I don't know what's going on. I mean, like my button on the
Okay.
on the keyboard doesn't. Okay, so I watched a interview with Louis Arnaud recently, and he mentioned that by 2030, by his calculations, the net energy gain would be zero. He actually thinks that right now it's kind of zero, but it's kind of compensated by the renewables. Is there any comments on from any of you guys?
That sounds very far from reality, as far as I can tell. I think Charlie is our local EROI expert.
What interview was that?
Well, it was the interview with it was the lady, I forgot her name. I watched recently. I can find out, but
Okay.
I'll say something about this. I actually interviewed Louis Arnaud about 5-6 years ago, and he was talking about this. It's the thermodynamic. He's trying to measure the thermodynamic energy that basically when it gets to zero, then that's the problem. We don't really have enough energy to continue the system. But he first said 2025. Now he's moved it to 2030. I just think it's too complex to be able to really understand that data. So I don't know if it's going to hold. I don't think that information will likely hold. It's because I think we're going to continue to move that number further back.
All right. And Charlie?
What was that? I'm sorry, I missed that because I was sending something to Andrii. But who were we talking about who said EROI is going to zero?
Yeah, Louis
Okay.
Arnaud had said that in a recent interview. I'm just trying to find
I don't know. Was he the guy who was talking somehow about the heat in the ground? There was somebody who was talking about that. But anyway,
Yes. Yeah.
the shale oil appears to have a very high EROI, probably higher than 20 to 1. It's not only abundant, it has a high EROI, at least for the moment. Now, anybody interested in EROI, I have a piece coming out in Nature Energy this Friday. I can share it, not till then. So anybody who's interested in peak oil, it's just a 2-page, but it's really pithy. Talk about methodology with peak oil, because I'm not particularly happy with a lot of the assessments that have been done. But at the moment, there's a lot of high EROI oil left in the world for at least a little while.
Oh, and in terms of the natural gas, I wanted to point to this slide Steve was doing just a few minutes ago. He was showing that it looks like it's going to go down in the 2030s as well. All right. Okay, Dusty, you had a question?
Yeah. For Charlie, what did you mean by a little while? Kind of what would be your guess of what a little while means?
I'm trying to figure that out.
Okay.
I don't know that I know. It's as I said, I'm hoping it's only going to be less than 4 years. But
my second question is not to get overly conspiratorial on my first time here, but I wonder if anyone finds it kind of interesting that a lot of the net zero goals happen to match a lot of kind of the projections we see for peak oil. And are there more people that kind of know what's going on than maybe we think?
I see a lot of bullshit.
That Trump's trying to grab Greenland and Canada and whatever the hell else. He may know. I suspect a lot of people in the military know, and they're not talking about it. And but I don't know. Nobody calls me up. And
They watch you very carefully, Charlie. I know that because they watch me. No, this is actually a military issue. I actually collated the number of countries that were peak oil literate, and they happen to be all the countries. A government that's done a peak oil report that's then released but then made confidential. They happen to be all the countries that were the coalition that went to war in the second Iraq war, and they're all in alliance. United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Europe. They're all together, right? So now I've been. Someone took me aside and said, "Look, this is a security issue where countries go to war over this stuff, right?" So the peak oil community has been mapping this, and every military intelligence unit in the world is actually paying attention to not only peak oil but the peak oil community, people like us. And the reason they do that is the real problem here is because we don't have a solution for when oil goes yet. The flashpoint's not peak oil; it's common knowledge amongst the public, and that's when shit gets real. So I've actually come to the unfortunate conclusion, the green transition. What is it? If we were to actually do this, the number of power stations that should be on the ground by now is enormous, orders of magnitude more than what we're seeing. And what's being planned is orders of magnitude. It's lip service only. So I've come to the unfortunate conclusion that humanity at large is being walked to the edge of the pier, the veil lifts, and we realize, oh, yeah, the plan's not going to work, guys. The work we promised, Trevor did those calculations. He's not with us anymore. Never mind. We're your government. We're now going to make the hard decisions. Right?
Who's going to eat?
And so we're in a world at the moment where politics is driven by whim, and no one wants to hear any bad news, and there is no easy solution once we phase out fossil fuels. And all solutions on the table involve a lot of money and a lot of work and doing a lot more for less. Right? And so I'm inherently suspicious of every single one of our nation state leadership, and most of what they say is horseshit.
We know that, but I was wondering, do you know the Vaca Muerta down in Argentina? I've heard they're thinking of fracking the Vaca Muerta. So I was thinking maybe there are other places in the world where it's possible to frack and to do this thing that we've done in the United States. What do people think? I've heard that it's difficult, but I mean, once they get started, who knows?
I find it amazing. I find it amazing because I've tried to answer that question. And I get that Art Berman knows more about oil than most people that I know. And he says it's a combination, the United States, a combination of rocks, infrastructure, knowledge. I mean, you have to have all these and investment people who are willing to invest. And I wrote a neat little editorial saying in 2018 called Trump has his losers to thank for his economic success, because people that were investing in fracking then that was losing money, but we were producing oil and oil was selling for, $20 a barrel or whatever it was, $30 a barrel. So energy was half the price in the United States that it was in Europe, and half the price that it had been during the Obama administration. And so, of course, the United States economy was doing really well because energy was very, very cheap when Trump was there as president. I suppose I should try to send that little, it's just 2 pages. And it's amazing, of 800 people who responded to that thing that was published in something called The Hill, a political rag, that 798 of them got it wrong, didn't understand what I was saying. It was just amazing. They thought I was making a political statement and I was making a resource statement. So that really introduced me to our total inability to talk to people. And when Simon was talking before, I thought, well, maybe we ought to hook up with one of these conspiracy groups that has millions of followers, and that's one way to get our message out.
Okay,
Steve, how many people read your rag?
I get a small fraction. I mean, I get a lot of people on Twitter, but compared to everything, it's always a small fraction. There's too many distractions that get most of the, and this is why I wanted to talk about. You mentioned about the shale. There is shale around the world. China has been trying to produce oil and shale oil and gas, but their geology is messed up. It's not similar to what the U.S. is. But what I wanted to share, and maybe Mathis, and this has been going a long time, and appreciate his presentation and Simon, but I think the issue is with the new political, with Trump going in there and Musk, there's a lot of competing. Let me just share this one graphic, and this is what. Do you see that?
No,
Not yet.
might have to do the window again. For some reason,
Okay.
the entire screen isn't working this time
All right.
for you.
Okay.
There.
Do
Yep,
you see
we see
that?
Tanker Starship.
This is amazing to me because I was raised in Cocoa Beach, Cape Canaveral, Florida. So I was fortunate enough to see the Saturn V take off, and it would shake buildings, 4 or 5 miles away, the windows. This Starship is bigger than the Saturn V down there that Musk is launching in Boca, Texas. Look how much fuel, methane, which is LNG, it's 150 tankers per launch. His idea, and the reason why he supported the Democrats to get his EVs going. Now he's supported the Republicans because he wants a free rein to really ramp up the Starship. And this is it's technology, right? We're going to do all this technology, but it's really fueled by fossil fuels. He wants to produce 1,000 of these Starships.
How many tankers of oil does it take to make a tanker of liquid oxygen?
Well, I'm not quite sure.
How many
on the
oil
liquid
wells
oxygen.
are drained per Starship?
It's a lot more liquid oxygen, but it's 150 tankers of LNG just for one launch. And he wants to build 1,000 of these things and shoot 3,000 off a day. He's never going to get there, but this is and I'll stop sharing, but that is the competing, what we're seeing, that the world has to compete with politics. And I was really shocked. This is why he's really moving forward. This is why he really helped Trump get elected, because he wants free range to go with no EPA regulations. He just wants to really ramp this up, and it's going to be a major demand on fossil fuels. I don't think people realize how big that is. So it's not EVs. They're burning a lot of, and to get to Mars, which he wants to do by 2027. You have to have a tanker in space. You have to have 15 launches just to fill up the tanker to get one Starship to Mars. And I think that he's going to push this 100%. So these are the kind of crazy things that the humans are facing to deal with. If we're going to be efficient or more efficient in some places, this is what's happening on the other scale. And I don't think people realize it. I think it's going to take off seriously in the next few years.
I think that's just a hype and just to create euphoria to boost the stock markets, because the stock market is pretty narrow right now. Only like 5 to 7 stocks are pulling the stock market. So the longer that goes on, the longer the stock market will keep going. They can only count on these few stocks, and they have to create euphoria. That's all there is, I think.
Well, NASA shot off 13 Apollo Saturn V's. It's over a 7-year period, 8-year period. He's already shot off 7 of the Starships, and I mean they're probably going to double that this year and triple it the next year. So I don't see any, and I just wanted to share that because it really shocked me how much fuel is being used to ramp that up. So,
Steve, what's your opinion on? Like I heard that China's projections for their demographics. They plan to like half their population by like 2050. Do you think they might have done like some calculations so they can cut the headcounts in tandem with the depletion of oil? Let's say oil per capita to stay relatively the same. I don't know. I've been thinking about it. Maybe just.
I think Andrii wants to speak.
Oh, well, I just want to close the meeting just because we're half an hour over time. And okay, if you wanted to give a final remark, Steve, and then I want to let Mathis do a closing statement, and then we'll close.
It's anybody's guess. Actually, if we're going to see any decrease in population, it's going to happen by Mother Nature, pandemics. I think that's what's going to do it, unfortunately. And so we know this in the past, and we're doing a lot of, irresponsible ways of raising protein on a leverage scale that isn't wise over the long term. So I don't know how it plays out in the future for individual countries and regions, but I think Mother Nature has more of a hand on that.
All right. Thanks. So Mathis, would you give us a closing statement?
First of all, thank you all. Fascinating conversation. I still believe that overall we're facing a mindset problem. And what I'm surprised is I think kind of the technology people really believe in 10x solutions can be kind of brought forward quickly. And that's kind of, I think personally, a bit of a delusion overall. So being able to bring forward this kind of information with such clarity and helpfulness, I think is super helpful. I think what, for me, one big piece is, and I think I see that as well in your presentations, is how to make this information empowering, that people see they don't have to wait for others to act. It's not about kind of waiting for everybody to agree so we can move forward. But there are many opportunities out there to react to the context of Overshoot. And I think that's what we need to stimulate, so people feel the sense not just of desire of that they want it, but also a sense of agency that they actually can do it. And I think the way also you presented, which is I think the third ingredient that we need to stimulate, is a sense of curiosity, because we don't know really how the transformation could happen, how much it will be disaster, how much it will be design. But by staying intrigued by not knowing, I think that's how we build more interest, because it is crazy. It's so significant what we're talking about, and so few people are involved in the conversation. That's scary.
Thank you, Mathis. And everyone that presented today, please do send me your slides, because people wanted on YouTube to see them. And so, and we'll do another one next month. Everyone is invited. As
One last thing, in Mathis, any updates in the future on your work?
Thank you. Yeah.
No, I mean, do you have any planned updates, any important updates that you'll be doing in the future?
You mean right? Do you want me to tell it right now?
No, well, any highlights you would love to share?
In the future, happy to share. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So
Yeah.
as we found you, we leave you in the love and in the light of the one infinite creator. Go forth, therefore, rejoicing in the power and the infinite power and the infinite peace of the infinite creator within you and all around you. May you be blessed, my friends. All right.
Thank
Ending
you.
the stream. All right. So I've ended the stream.